In this episode, you'll learn some incredibly useful intensifiers like incredibly, seriously, and exceptionally, so that you can make your adjectives sound seriously intense and make your English exceptionally brilliant. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with nearly 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are you, Craig?
I'm feeling a bit intense today. I wonder why. Are you feeling intense?
Yes, I'm rather anxious, I must say. Rather anxious about this lesson. We're hoping it will be very intense.
We've spoken about intensifiers before. That was back in episode 372. We looked at words, fairly basic words like really, very, quite, pretty, and fairly to make adjectives more intense. And in part 2 today, we're going to look at some more advanced words and different examples with intensifiers. But before that, we have a voice message from Luis from New York.
Hello, Reza. Hello, Craig. This is Luis from New York again. It's been a long time since I sent to you my first voice message, and I want to say thank you so much for the places you recommended me to live in Valencia. Thank you so much. I want to answer one of the questions you asked me. Yes, of course, I want to going back to Spain because all my family is living there. My girlfriend is living there in Madrid. So this city, New York, is a beautiful city to live. It's a beautiful city to work. But definitely, I prefer the quality life that we have in Spain. So that is the main reason. Of course, my family and the food, of course. So yeah, definitely, this city is beautiful. But I prefer going back to Spain. I'm sorry for not having answered earlier, but I've been quite busy. I'm building a startup here and in Spain as well. So yeah, thank you for your support. Thank you for everything and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Luis, for your message. And we do remember you sending us your original message telling us you were coming back to Spain. And then I asked you why, because New York seems to many people as such an exciting, wonderful city to be in. And actually it is, because I was lucky enough to visit New York and I absolutely loved it. But I also totally understand your reasons for coming to Spain and living here because of the reasons you mentioned in your message. And I can imagine you being very busy in New York and working very hard and maybe not having enough time to enjoy life because it is quite expensive to live there.
Yes, and indeed it's widely accepted that Spain is one of the best places to eat in the world. I'm sure they've got lots of nice food in New York, but the Spanish take eating very seriously, so I can understand you miss the food and also the quality of life. Perhaps people have more money in some parts of New York, but a little bit of sunshine out in the terrace with a drink with friends is a common activity in Spain and probably not quite so common in New York, I would say.
And good luck with your startup, Luis, when you do come back, if you're continuing with the business over here in Spain. And you must be extremely excited to be coming back to Spain and living here. Extremely. That's one example of an intensifier, isn't it, Reza? To be extremely excited about something. Obviously, excited is an adjective. I'm excited. But if you're extremely excited, you're very, very excited, as Luis must be thinking of coming back to Spain.
So yes, extremely is an intensifier. And we're going to talk about other intensifiers today. For example, absolutely, exceptionally, totally. Craig already mentioned extremely. But these words, they can't appear on their own. That's why they're called intensifiers, because they intensify something else. So the adverbs, the intensifiers, which are adverbs, which I mentioned, absolutely, exceptionally, totally, and extremely, they're generally used to intensify strong adjectives. So think of the adjectives awful, disgusting, brilliant, fascinating. They're strong adjectives. They're not like the adjective good, for example. Good is not very strong. Good is okay, but it's not fantastic. It's just good. So we can say absolutely fantastic, for example, but we can't say absolutely good. Doesn't sound right, does it? You just know, your instinct tells you, even if you don't know the rules, it doesn't sound good, does it? That was absolutely good. Absolutely good? You can't say absolutely plus good, because good isn't a strong adjective. So absolutely is an intensifier, which has to go with a strong adjective. Absolutely awful. Exceptionally brilliant. Totally fascinating. Extremely excited. So the adverbs, the intensifiers, are going with strong adjectives.
And some intensifiers like to go with particular adjectives, depending on the meaning of the adjective. And in other words, that's a strong collocation. Sometimes we just like to put particular words together. For example, the intensifier dangerously likes to go with the adjective ill. A person can be dangerously ill. It also likes to go with hot. People have been experiencing dangerously hot temperatures in some parts of the world recently because of global warming. It's been dangerously hot and people have been dying. Another example is loose, L-O-O-S-E, which is the opposite of tight, loose. If you have a part of your car that's very, very loose, you could say it's dangerously loose because you could have an accident if you don't make it tighter.
Our next intensifier, our next adverb, which gives intensity to certain adjectives, is seriously. Typical collocations with the intensifier seriously are damaged. So if something is seriously damaged, it's going to be hard to use it. Or for a person, you could be seriously hurt. And if you are seriously hurt, then later you may become dangerously ill, as Craig mentioned earlier. So seriously hurt, dangerously ill. Another one with seriously is disadvantaged. Seriously disadvantaged. That means that you do not have anywhere near equal conditions to your competitors. You're seriously disadvantaged.
The word high is an adjective. You can have a high building, for example, and the adverb is highly. So if you are highly successful, that means you're very, very, very successful. And if you are very, very, very intelligent, you can say you are highly intelligent. That's a very strong collocation. We know that our listeners, that's you, are highly intelligent. Another common collocation with highly is likely, or the opposite, unlikely. It's highly unlikely that I'll get the job because I'm not qualified. Or it's highly likely to rain tomorrow. There's a strong possibility.
From the adjective bitter, we can get the adverb and the intensifier bitterly. Typical collocations with bitterly are bitterly unhappy, not happy at all, really annoyed. Bitterly disappointed. You were sure you were going to get the job. They told you you were going to get it, but at the last minute they gave it to someone else. You were bitterly disappointed. And the last example we've got is to do with weather, bitterly cold.
Which countries get bitterly cold in the winter? Russia, doesn't it? Russia gets bitterly cold.
Can you imagine? So cold that it kind of makes you feel bitter. You're like, oh, bloody cold. It's bitterly cold.
Canada gets bitterly cold in the winter too. Sad, the opposite of happy. Sadly is the adverb, and that likes to go together with mistaken. If someone is not correct, you can say they are mistaken. And if you want to intensify that and make it stronger, you can say you're sadly mistaken. Or neglected is another word that collocates with sadly. Sadly neglected. Imagine there's a house that is in disrepair. It's looking old. There are lots of problems. You can say, it's such a shame. It's a lovely building, but it needs a lot of work. It's been sadly neglected for many, many years. Another example, missed. A person can be sadly missed if they go away. If Reza stopped podcasting, I'm sure you'll agree with me that he would be sadly missed.
I wonder how you would react, listeners, if the podcast came to an end. Would you be deeply saddened? Deeply is our next intensifier. To sadden is a verb, which means to make someone feel sad. So if you are deeply saddened, you're not just a little bit sad, you're very sad. Deeply hurt. Someone has said something which you don't like, you really don't like, you are deeply hurt. Or something similar, deeply offended. Someone said I looked terrible, I had an awful personality and they didn't like me at all. I was deeply offended.
Perfect is another adjective and the adverb is perfectly, and as you can notice here we're just adding ly to these adjectives to make the adverb. So deep, deeply, sad, sadly, perfect, perfectly. If something is perfectly clear, it's very, very clear. Let me make this perfectly clear to you. I will not tolerate bad behaviour in this house, for example. Or something could be perfectly obvious. It's perfectly obvious to me that podcasts are a wonderful way to improve your English while you're at the gym. Or a person can be perfectly normal, or something could be perfectly normal. I think that during the pandemic it's become perfectly normal to become a little more antisocial and not mix with people.
The next intensifier we've got for you is the adverb widely, from the adjective wide. So it's widely accepted, or I could also say it's widely agreed that listening to podcasts will improve your English. Well, listening to podcasts in English, obviously. It's widely accepted, it's widely agreed. If it's very easy to obtain something, you can get it anywhere or there's easy access to it, you can say that it is widely available. For example, paracetamol is a drug which is widely available.
And these days, during the pandemic, masks are widely available and hand gel or hand sanitizer has become widely available, but sadly, not yet, vaccines have not become widely available in some countries.
Let's give you a few examples with sentences with some of the intensifiers we've already used and a few more. So let's see if you can spot the word which is the intensifier. Which word in our sentence is the intensifier? Which word makes the meaning more intense?
Reza, I think it's going to rain tomorrow, I'm sure of it.
I strongly disagree. So, what was the intensifier there? Yep, that's right. It was the word strongly.
Here's another example. You know, Reza's students are rather noisy. So rather there was the intensifier, rather noisy.
I had a really good student last year. His English is absolutely amazing, almost like a native speaker. Absolutely amazing, more than amazing. So absolutely is our intensifier there.
I think Lewis, who's living in New York, I think his English is absolutely amazing. But if he's practicing in New York, then there's no surprise.
It's perfectly normal that his English should be good living in an English-speaking country.
My next door neighbour, his dad is seriously ill. So we had ill before. Seriously is our intensifier in that sentence.
If you think I'm lending you more money, you're sorely mistaken. This word sorely is the intensifier. From the adjective sore, S-O-R-E, if something is sore, it's painful. Yeah. So if you're sorely mistaken, you are so wrong, you're so mistaken that it's going to hurt you. You are not going to like the reality. You are sorely mistaken.
We're recording this podcast in July and it's extremely hot at the moment in Valencia. It's very, very hot. So extremely there makes hot very intense.
Do you remember earlier Craig's example of bitterly cold? It's curious. So for cold, it's very typical to say bitterly, but we don't say bitterly plus hot. It's curious. As Craig explained at the beginning, some adverbs like to go with certain adjectives. Bitterly likes to go with cold, very, very cold, but it doesn't go with hot. We don't say bitterly plus hot. You can say extremely hot, you can say incredibly hot, etc., but not bitterly plus hot.
You could say that about quite a few of these. We just had the examples absolutely amazing and seriously ill. Would you say absolutely ill?
No.
It doesn't collocate, it doesn't go together. So you have to learn these words in pairs as they collocate with each other.
Craig, as you know, Mickey Mouse is a highly successful cartoon character.
Really? I had no idea. I'm utterly surprised.
He's not just quite successful, he is highly successful. Craig, he had a bad experience recently. He's clearly unhappy at missing Mickey's appearance at Disneyland. He went to Disneyland fully expecting to see Mickey, but Mickey didn't appear that day, and he's clearly unhappy about it. Clearly is our intensifier there.
And I don't know if you noticed, did you notice, Reza, you used another...
I didn't even notice it, yeah.
When you said fully expected, he fully expected means completely expected, intensifying expected. When I heard that Mickey was not going to appear, I felt seriously disadvantaged.
Craig, I once saw Mickey Mouse and I was bitterly disappointed. You know why?
Because you were completely drunk.
No, because he was completely drunk. I was sober for a change. It was Mickey who was completely drunk. I couldn't believe it. I didn't think Mickey Mouse would drink. I was sadly mistaken. It turns out he used to be an alcoholic.
Really?
Allegedly. I better put the words allegedly there. I'm thinking of the legal power of the Disney company. He used to be an alcoholic. Allegedly. It has been said.
We don't want to hear from Disney's lawyers.
It has been said. I'm merely reporting. I'm going to cover myself there. I might be sadly mistaken to put in such a joke without the words allegedly there.
I think you're totally crazy. Totally crazy. Absolutely crazy. Totally crazy is another example. And finally, we went to a restaurant yesterday, Reza and I, and the food was good, but it was dreadfully expensive. Now, dreadful often has a negative connotation. It was dreadful. The meal was dreadful. The fish was dreadful. It was very, very bad. Dreadfully expensive. Very, very expensive in a negative way.
Speaking about food, Craig, I guess you heard about the new super tax in Spain. They're going to put on chocolate.
Yes, I was utterly devastated to hear the news. Utterly devastated. Totally, completely, or utterly devastated by the terrible news.
Craig, what did you think of Luis's voice message that we heard earlier?
I thought it was remarkably clear. You can remark about something, which means you comment on something, and if something is remarkably clear, it's very, very clear.
Now, all those intensifiers we've just used in our examples, which were to remind you strongly, rather, absolutely, seriously, sorely, extremely, highly, clearly, completely, dreadfully, totally, utterly, remarkably. By the way, you can read them in the show notes if you like. They can be used, I would say, in any context. They could be formal, they could be informal. They're pretty flexible. Here's some more intensifiers which are, I would say, definitely more informal. For example, Craig, the word dead. That joke was dead funny. Now, do I mean they're muerto?
No, you mean very. If you say something is dead plus an adjective, that just intensifies the adjective in an informal, colloquial way. So if the joke was dead funny, it was very, very funny. if you are dead serious, you're very, very serious.
So the word dead there has been used as an intensifier, so it's an adverb, but I repeat, only for informal or colloquial English would we use the word dead in that way. Craig, how would you describe this Rolex watch?
Well, first I would say it's unusual for you to be wearing a Rolex watch, but it looks bloody expensive. Now be careful where you use the word bloody, because some people might find it a little offensive. It's not a swear word, it's not a very, very bad word like F-U-C-K, for example, but it does intensify the adjective, and in a similar way, if you want to be even stronger, but be extremely careful, you could use F-U-C-K-I-N-G as a way to intensify expensive. So the Rolex watch is expensive.
Hey Craig, look out the window. Look, see that Lamborghini?
What?
You see that Lamborghini?
Yeah, oh, that's so cool, man.
Yeah, convertible, Lamborghini convertible. That is so cool. So don't forget the word so, one of the most commonly used intensifiers in the English language. So cool.
So
that's a different use of so. Craig is not using the word so there as an intensifier. He's saying pues, or like the next thing, or let's move on. Another use of so.
Exactly. What have you learned in this episode? Well, we hope you've learned how to use intensifiers to make your adjectives even stronger. Now, the ones we've mentioned here in this episode are widely used, which means they're very used, and they're extremely useful, which means they're very useful. So go to the show notes, inglespodcast.com/376, and you can see all of the words we've mentioned in this episode.
Now it's your turn to practice. Why don't you send us a voice message? Have a look at the link in the show notes, if you like, to speakpipe.com/inglespodcast and send us an audio message. We'd be extremely pleased to hear from you.
Extremely grateful. If you want to reach us by email, you can contact me, Craig, Craig, at inglespodcast.com. That's my email address. And to reach Reza, go to belfastreza, that's REZA, at gmail.com.
And why not have a look at the online store for lots of different materials which will help you improve your English? Have a look at store, S-T-O-R-E, store.mansioningles.net.
And you'll find some exceptionally well-priced courses and material. Before we go, thank you to all of you who are helping us by supporting this podcast on Patreon. You can join our program for as little as $1.20 per month. That's including VAT, value-added tax, and by doing so you get instant access to recent transcriptions. For more information, go to Patreon, patreon.com/inglespodcast.
We'd like to name all of our Patreon supporters, but I'm afraid we just don't have time. But what we will do, as we always do at the end of every episode, is to welcome our most recent sponsors, who are Edgar Velandia, Ricardo Sendulski, Diana Carolina Martinez Mendez, Floriano Blanco Rodriguez, and Isaac Baena Garcia. So thank you to all of you for recently joining the Patreon scheme. Craig, what have we got on next week's episode?
Well, before we tell you about next week, if you were extremely busy, there's another intensifier. And if you missed last week's episode, we spoke about 8 common colloquial expressions. And next week, we're answering a listener question and explaining the difference between for me and to me. Do you know when to use for me and to me? If not, we hope you'll listen next week. Until then, thank you for listening this week. It's goodbye from me.
And it's bye-bye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later.